Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
This was back in 2021 or so, and I started the immigration or the new residency process. It's not really immigration. And by the time I actually got there, real estate prices had gone up about 80%. Still cheaper than Vancouver, but once I saw those kind of go skyrocket, that advantage of being in Miami was no longer there. And so that's another factor for me moving back to Vancouver. And I'm just about to buy a place here now. And that might be another reason why I've worked so hard to build a business. It's sort of a adaptation thing. You know, you have to adapt to the environment that you're in, and home ownership in this generation. It's a very difficult thing in certain areas, but at this point, I'm ready to proceed with buying a property here. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So can we go back just a bit, just a little bit? So At some point, you identify that you can create an immigration consulting business. And by the way, I love what you're doing. I've been on your website extensively. I love what you're doing. I think what you're doing is something that is unbelievably, incredibly important. And the reason I say that is, if you've ever spent any time with somebody who is in the US and they're trying to get their legal status changed, they're trying to legally immigrate here, it's heartbreaking. And I have some personal experience with this. I've sat with people that were struggling to try to immigrate legally to the US, and they've had a very difficult time doing that. And it's hard to describe what it's like when you have family in the US and you're trying to get to them and live with them and build a future together and that kind of thing, and you just can't afford to do it. It's unbelievable how costly it is. So let's go back for just a second, because I want to make sure that people understand how we got to where we are today. So at some point, you make a decision to get into immigration consulting. And I know you mentioned that it's a higher ticket thing and all that kind of thing. And that's all great. I'd rather, if it's okay, or to add to it, what I'd like to do is find out what point did this happen? So at what point did you say, okay, I need to be involved in this?
Yeah, well, I think that was when I saw there wasn't many clients coming in from business plan writing and from website content. So I saw that ChatGPT was becoming a bigger thing. So I needed to make that transition into something different. And it was a big crisis for my business to see such a drop in the number of customers. And when you're going through that kind of crisis, you become very, very creative. And I thought, what are my skills and what relates to the information I already have? It was probably a couple of years where I was sort of toying with the idea, opening up to immigration consulting and completing E2 visas and other various visas for people.
Was there a point where you met somebody and they were struggling with their immigration status? Was there a tipping point? Was there something that happened that all of a sudden you went, okay, I need to be doing this?
It wasn't somebody that I met, but it was whenever I come up with a business idea, I write it down. At one point, I think I had like 50 things that I thought I could do. And that was a deterrent for a while, because I had my foot in my hands in so many different things that it made me stray away from being more laser focused on what I'm doing to grow it. So when those initial things that were producing money for myself and for my family, when they started to look less viable, I had to dig into more of these other business ideas that I had. And that's just one of the skills that I had because I went through the visa process myself. So that's the skill that I developed, that I was able to do it. And I saw that there's a huge demand for people who want to have an E2 visa or another visa. Uh, and they're having to deal with the lawyers. I remember when I went through the process, I was quoted $11,000 to have a lawyer do an E2 visa for me.
Mhm.
And after actually doing the process myself, I saw how astronomical that price was. It is a tedious and annoying task to do if you don't know what you're doing the first time. But seeing that I was able to do it and that I had the information and that there was a market demand for it, I then decided to shift into doing the immigration consulting and those E2 visas. So I first of all had the skill set and I had that business idea written down. And then I had to test to see if it was marketable, if I would be paying too much money for a person to acquire a customer. And so I started testing with ads, and I saw that I was getting a positive conversion. And once I saw that, I started scaling up the ads and then diversifying into different locations to advertise. And it's a big challenge for many entrepreneurs is being able to diversify where you're able to acquire clients.
Mhm.
Often an entrepreneur will find clients from one source and they'll rely on that source. And then if that source decides not to work with you anymore, which is extremely common, I've seen it happen so many times where, and it's happened to me several times,
Mhm.
where, if you're ranked high in Google SEO, for example, and then overnight, for whatever reason, Google decides not to rank you anymore, it's like having your business burnt down,
Yeah.
brick and mortar store. And
Yeah,
you're
they
no
changed the algorithm overnight, and all of a sudden, you're not ranked the way you were, or you don't even show up anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as a storefront, you have people walking by your store, and these are the people who might step in. And with having SEO, these are people who are browsing by your store essentially.
Right.
And so basically just like burning down your business. And that's a huge problem. It's happened to me
Mhm.
with Google, it's happened to me with Microsoft. And so I was seeing that there was many different areas where I could attract clients for this type of business.
Gotcha.
It took significant investment, but since I had the capital from my previous business experiences, I was able to invest that. It would take a longer amount of time for a new entrepreneur who doesn't have that startup capital to do that, but it's still possible, especially since there's no real free options like Craigslist and these classifieds that used to be popular where you didn't have to pay anything, like the way I started my business way back in 2012. Um, so that's how I kind of developed it. It wasn't really a mentor or a person who was in need. It was, other than myself and my daughter, like these were the people who were in need. So it caused me to dig in deep. And it's during those times when you're going through business crisis where you become most creative.
Mhm.
Artists say it about their creativity. They do their best work when they're going through depression or anything
Yeah.
like that. So your back is against the wall. It's fight or flight, and you have to become creative to survive. And that's why I came up with the idea for the business consulting and or the immigration consulting as well. Every step of my career, I've come up with these steps, and it's always been when I've been going through the hardest periods. Either I develop a new business or I figure out a new marketing strategy. But after these downtimes that I face, I'm always propelled so much further because of them. And I think it's Ray Dalio who's written the book Principles. He's
Mhm.
was a hedge fund manager.
Most successful in the world. Yeah.
Very- Many people have heard of him, and he talks about the going through these spirals that you have. So you're moving ahead in business, and then you kind of like spiral backwards, but then you swing back and you keep going
Mhm.
up. This is how I've experienced it, and I try
Mhm.
to remember that when I go through difficult times
Mhm.
with business. I really, really try to remember that because I know that I'm in for something better. As terrible as it seems at the time, if I'm losing sleep, not eating, which so many business people go through when they're going through these
Mhm.
challenges, because it's all up to you. You don't have an employer to make sure you have more reliable employment. It's really up to you. But those are the times when you can spring forward if you just dig deep and come up with those creative ideas that can propel your business.
So at the point where you made your application for the E2 visa, you were headed to Dallas from Vancouver?
I went to Dallas as a tourist visa, so as
Okay,
Canadian, being there for 6 months. So I was there, and then during the time that I was in Dallas, I put my application in for the E2 visa and was
gotcha.
approved. And that's when we decided to stay there. We were, the E2 visa, you can stay for 5 years. We kind of intended to do that, but circumstances changed, and you change yourself as a person as well, and
Yeah,
even more of it seemed a much better idea to move back to Vancouver given the circumstances.
gotcha. So an E2 visa, can you tell us what that is specifically?
Yeah, an E2 visa is a visa where you're able to come to the United States for 5 years. And if you're a member of a treaty country, treaty countries include Canada, the UK, Australia, but there's also dozens of others out there, even South Korea. You apply for an E2 visa as an entrepreneur. You have to make a significant investment. They call it significant. It's an abstract term, but that's because it means different things for different companies.
Mhm.
For a Shopify store, significant investment might be 25 or $30,000. The consulate agent, what they do when they're reviewing the significant investment qualification requirement is whether that money is significant enough in order to create a high likelihood that the business will be successful.
Mhm.
Something different for a Shopify store, or something for like a construction company, which would need a much higher threshold.
Right.
So able to do the significant investment component, and you're able to show the source of funds, and you meet all of the other requirements like no criminal history, showing that the company is real and operating, like having it incorporated in the US. If you're able to meet these different things, then you go to an interview at the consulate
Mhm.
in Toronto. That's the case for all Canadians, or London for the UK. You go to the consulate in your own country, you go for a 5-minute interview, and then if you get the interview, then they approve you and they staple the visa onto your passport, and then you're able to come to the US for 5 years. You can renew it every 5 years if you're paying your taxes and the company's marginal, meaning it's enough to support you and your family who are there. And a lot of people switch to an EB-5 visa after that, which gives you full immigration, requires $1.3 million invested, and hiring at least 10 people for a minimum of 2 years. That's so the most of the people who are coming to the US with the E2 visa are entrepreneurs who want to create a company in the US and who also want to live there, and that's where we get most of our clients from.
Gotcha. So the typical cost to hire an attorney to obtain an E2 visa, according to your website anyway, it sounds like it's around $12,000. It may be more than that now, right?
Yeah. I've heard people telling me that they paid 35,000.
Oh my goodness.
The lawyer didn't do anything for a year and a half. And they were eventually refunded. Somebody just told me this yesterday. They paid 35,000. Nothing happened for a year and a half. They couldn't get a hold of their lawyer, and then they were refunded other than 1,000 cancellation. I don't know why they would have to pay that, but it's an astronomical fee, and there's a lot of extras on top of that. So I've seen an average of about $11,000, $12,000
Yeah.
for the lawyer representation for the E2 visa. And then there's a lot of fees that are added. They're difficult to get a hold of apparently, and they take longer to complete the entire process. They say it's 4 to 5 weeks. I've heard that's a lot more.
With your company, the cost is what?
$3,900, and then 175 for additional applicants. So you can bring your spouse, you can bring your children, and so it's 3,900 plus 175 additional. Lawyers are 11,000 plus 500 additional per applicant.
And just so we're clear, you don't need an attorney to apply and get approved for an E2 visa, correct?
No, I actually did the whole process myself after much trial and error, but I didn't
And
have
you're not an attorney.
not an attorney. Nope.
See,
None.
that's what I'm trying to get at. People don't understand that they don't need an attorney to do this, right? They're the culture basically, and the belief is that you need an attorney in order to do this paperwork, and you don't, right? So that's what I think is so unbelievably remarkable about what you do and so valuable about what you do is a lot of these families that are looking to come to the US legally don't realize that what you do is available. They don't
Yeah.
realize that they don't have to pay $35,000 to somebody and not be able to call them for a year, right? And not get anything done. And I'm not saying, understand, I'm not saying that all law firms are created equal, okay? And not all attorneys are created equal. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I've sat with people that just are going through this nightmare of trying to figure out how they're going to afford to be able to legally immigrate to the US. And your site and your service, what you do is an opportunity for them. I mean, it's something that I believe is incredibly needed. I know it's incredibly needed, and it's something that I'm excited that I got a chance to get to know you and to know about what you do, just so I can send people to you. Because from time to time we come across people that like I work with a lot of real estate investors in San Diego County, and a lot of them are flipping houses. And one of the things that happened during COVID was a bunch of our crews were actually locked in Mexico. They couldn't get up here. And so one of the things that happened with one of my very, very good friends is he was having an immigration issue post-COVID, right? And so they were trying to figure out how they were going to how they were going to try to help him stay here permanently, I guess is the best way to put it, right? So it's, you come in on whatever paperwork he was coming in on, but he was looking to try and establish legal residency, right? So he's trying to get his green card, basically. And so we were trying to figure out the different legal ramifications, different ways to go about doing that. And it was a nightmare, Philip. It was one of the most gut-wrenching things I've ever dealt with ever. And it wasn't, I'm here legally. I don't have this issue, but this person who I absolutely think is one of the best people on the planet, just as a person, period, but he's also an expert in construction and all that, you know what I mean? To try to figure out a way to get him to be able to stay here was a real honest to goodness challenge. And it affected me in a way where it really broke my heart, because we're talking to these different attorneys and they're quoting us certain amounts, and it's like, okay, where in the world are we going to get that kind of capital? Where in the world are we going to make that work? Not that, having him here is worth it, obviously, but it's just doing what you do is so unbelievably important, and more important than I think you even realize sometimes. That's why I wanted to get into the genesis of it and sort of find out how it developed, because I love stories, obviously, right? And our passion is to help people tell them. And what you're doing is unbelievably important. You're literally able to help people, help families stay together, but also to help people that are in the U.S. or that are coming to the U.S. stay here and be able to do what they can do. And it's anyway. I don't know how, I'm not saying it right, but it's what you do is incredibly important, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we talked about sort of how this evolved and how it got to where it is today. So you were in Dallas, you ended up moving to Miami. And now you're back in Vancouver and you're getting ready to buy a house and all that kind of thing. Very cool. And if somebody's looking, if somebody has an immigration challenge, or they have something that they're dealing with and they want to come to the United States to be with their family, how can they go about doing that with you?
Well, they can go to www.rightpalglobal.com, and there's many buttons there for schedule consultation, and then we can get on a consultation. I like to go over the business to find out, and their situation, to find out if they would qualify to enter the United States. And if I see that they can, then we can go ahead with starting their application. And not everybody does qualify. They do need that significant investment. They need to have an entrepreneurial background. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
necessary, but it definitely helps. It really, really helps if they're from one of those treaty countries and they've had a business there and they're looking to expand it to the US. So it's important that they qualify, first of all. So I ask them the qualifying questions. And then if we do think that they qualify, then we would go ahead with sending them a project proposal and getting started with the work. We would collect all the information necessary to complete the E2 visa application, and that takes about 20 days. And then we send it to the consulate. That's about 4 to 5 weeks, depending on which country they're coming from. And then within about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, again, depending on which country, they would be able to go to an interview at the consulate and to get the visa added to their passport. So one of the things you mentioned about your friend who was having issues with lawyers is they're quite often, again, it's not everybody, I suppose, but quite often they're gorging people because they're in precarious situations where it's desperate and people are willing to put all their money into having their status in the United States for their families. Their whole family's future is at stake. And like having gone through the process myself and come to the US with my family and understanding how important it is, it's a really, really huge deal. It's your family's future. I always make sure that I keep that in mind when I'm talking to clients and how I can structure it for their families. Always make myself available, create a boutique service so that people are able to see the progress of their application. They're not in the dark. They're not unable to get a hold of a lawyer, or if they do, they're going to be charged $400 an hour for it. So it's that empathetic kind of way of working with clients. It might restrict my growth because I spend so much time with everybody, but it's a definite need. I hear the horror stories of people who are going through lawyers, how much money they spent, how it accomplished absolutely nothing. And I want to make sure that we're offering something that goes against that, and perhaps other consulting companies will follow suit, and we can get rid of kind of this greedy corporate culture where you're taking advantage of people. Because in this situation, the immigration, it's a huge deal. It's one of the biggest industries in regards to the well-being of humanity, and people's lives and families are at stake here. So
Yeah, it's hard on them. You know, it's hard. This whole immigration thing is incredibly stressful. And it's one of those things that I hope eventually gets reformed somehow so that it's not so stressful for people. But I was looking him in the eye, you know, and I could see the pain. I could see what he was going through, and I wanted to fix it. You know what I mean? And I didn't know how. So let me ask you this. If somebody's in the US currently, can they apply for an E2 visa?
yeah, they can have their status changed. It's they would have to file a form I-129, and the process can be a little bit longer, although you have the option to pay 2,500 to the government to have them expedited and have it done in 15 days. So it's called a change of status. They want to make sure that they're extending a stay or anything, otherwise they'll
Right.
like rejected. But that's the way that you would do it if you're
Can
in.
you help them with that?
Yeah, we help with I-129s. It's
Okay.
basically creating the E2 visa application package and then having a change of status file added to that.
Because you did that, right? You came here on a tourist visa and then you actually changed it. What'd you call it?
It's an I-129 to change the
Right, but
status.
it's a status change. Is that what you called it?
Yeah,
So you changed your status from a tourist visa to an E2 visa, and you were here when you did it, right?
exactly. So when
Okay.
you're that's otherwise you have to go back to your home country for the interview and actually the whole application process.
So it's something you have experience doing personally.
Exactly. Yeah, and for my clients as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think that I've told you pretty much my life story there. I hope it was valuable to your audience.
I know it was. I know for a fact it was.
Right. Yeah, it's a bit different. My situation is a bit different just because I've done everything on my own,
Yeah.
and product of the times, I suppose. I traveled the world while growing a business, which is not
Mhm.
say back in the day. But I think having partners really does have an advantage in some ways, and probably something that I might want to explore now that I'm living, in a static location. But when you're traveling, living your life, and kind of doing business on the side, you don't really have that opportunity a lot of the times.
That's
So
true.
that's
So
the
one
difference.
last question.
Mhm.
If somebody's listening to this podcast, to this episode, and they're thinking about starting their own business, what's the single most important piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say if you're looking to scale, I would say definitely know how to delegate. I do probably 20% of the work necessary. The whole automation component that I was able to achieve with that first business, which I'm going to achieve with every business, is it allows you to free yourself up to do things that you really enjoy doing. So if you enjoy the work, then keep doing the work. But if you want to delegate, which is not very expensive, you can go to freelancer.com and have people do your graphic or whatever, those annoying tasks, then do that. You might want to focus your skill on marketing because it's difficult to find somebody who cares as much. And that's probably the most important thing about your business. If you can market, you can grow a business. And if you don't have any money at all, like I didn't, just focus on your skill and focus on word of mouth. Can try social media, but spend a little bit on advertising to build an audience, and then you can definitely get there for sure.
Awesome. Philip, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been a lot of fun, and it's been really enlightening.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
Appreciate you, bud. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.